You testified. I was sentenced. That was it. Done. No one questioned it. No one defended me. I walked out as the criminal, even though I was the only one telling the truth. Years passed. The world forgot, but I didn't. You lived calmly, partied, drove free, until today. Your car burns in the middle of the desert. You run, bleeding, afraid. And I stand at the end of your road, the place where all your lies can't run anymore, where my name is no longer whispered with shame, but with defiance. Calm. No judge, no gavel, because the court has slept for far too long, and justice has decided to walk alone. Just me? And one bullet. A bullet not just for your body, but for the system that protected you. For every night I was shamed. For every year I was silenced. You ended my life with a short sentence. One hearing. One false witness was all it took. Today, I return the favor, with something even shorter. No words, no mercy, just one final sound that no one can deny. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Then hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next powerful story. Chapter 1. The Testimony. The courtroom smelled like old wood and quiet betrayal. Celine Cross sat silently at the defense table, her hands folded neatly, her eyes locked onto the man at the witness stand. David Hargrove. His dark suit was perfect, his tie straight, his face smooth, trained, polished. He looked like justice incarnate. But she knew better. The bailiff called for silence as David leaned into the microphone. She accessed restricted files without authorization. She violated protocol, and she put lives at risk. His voice was calm, measured, the kind that people trusted. Celine didn't flinch. Her jaw remained tight, her breath steady, but her nails pressed hard into her palm. The judge nodded. The prosecutor smiled. "Can you confirm, Mr. Hargrove," the prosecutor asked, "that the defendant acted alone?" "Yes," David said, eyes sweeping the room. "She acted without clearance. She acted recklessly." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Celine's attorney, a tired man named Lott, didn't rise to object. He didn't rise for anything anymore. 2 weeks ago, he still believed in her case. But after the evidence vanished from the server, after the classified files were wiped clean and the logs scrubbed, he began to look at her the same way everyone else did, like a problem to be closed. Celine had worked 10 years for the Department of Security Oversight. She'd signed every oath, passed every clearance. Her record was spotless, until the day she stumbled onto a hidden directory of footage showing unauthorized drone strikes, falsified reports, and documents bearing David Hargrove's signature. She'd reported it. 2 days later, she was arrested. Now, in this room filled with polished wood and rehearsed truths, Celine watched as her reality unraveled. She wasn't allowed to speak. Not really. She'd testified the day before. She told the truth. The whole truth. But truth without evidence is just air. And in a courtroom like this, air didn't matter. Documents mattered. And those were gone. Gone because David had buried them. Behind classified walls she'd never reach again. "Do you believe Ms. Cross intended to cause harm?" the prosecutor asked. "I believe she thought she was above the law," David said. A pause. A silence more violent than any shout. Celine closed her eyes. She remembered the exact moment she realized she'd lost. It wasn't when she was arrested, not when she was arraigned, not even when her lawyer stopped answering her calls. It was when David said her name like it was dirt under his shoe. Ms. Cross cold, detached, final. The judge leaned forward. "We've heard all testimony. The court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow for the verdict." Gavel. One sharp crack. Done. People stood and gathered their briefcases, their coats, their small talk. Reporters texted headlines. Cameras clicked, but no one looked at her. Not even David. Celine remained seated. The guard came for her. As the cuffs locked around her wrists, she turned her head just slightly and whispered, I wasn't the criminal. I was the evidence. The guard pulled her up and walked her out. No one stopped them. No one asked a question. And the truth, the real truth, stayed locked in her mouth like a bullet waiting for the right time. Chapter 2. Gavel down. The courtroom felt colder the second day. Celine Cross stood tall in her gray suit, not the uniform of a free woman, but the final clothing she would wear before being labeled a traitor. The press benches were full, the cameras rolling, the judge already seated, his gavel resting like a guillotine. No opening statements, no drama, just the end. Will the defendant please rise? Celine rose. Her legs didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. The weight of betrayal anchored her spine. The judge cleared his throat, then read the verdict like a man reading grocery items. On all counts of unauthorized access, data breach, and violation of national security statutes, this court finds the defendant, Celine Cross, guilty. The gavel came down, one sharp knock, no gasp, no uproar, just silence. And then shuffling paper. The prosecutor smiled like it was routine. David Hargrove, seated near the front, barely looked at her. Barely moved, like she was already gone. Celine didn't blink. Inside, she burned. A bailiff moved behind her. Cuffs clicked into place again, metal and finality in one sound. Celine turned her head slowly toward David. He was pretending to read something, pretending she didn't exist, and that was the part that lit the match inside her. She wasn't sentenced because she failed. She was sentenced because she succeeded. Because she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Because she said something no one else dared to say. And because the man who should have stood beside her had buried her instead. Her eyes locked on David's profile. He had crafted every detail, every phrase, every omission, every lie. He hadn't just testified. He had written her funeral with words. As she was escorted down the side aisle of the courtroom, Celine passed rows of indifferent faces. People who would tweet her name in hashtags. People who would forget her tomorrow. Then she passed David. He still didn't look at her. So she leaned just a little, whispered barely above breath. You won today, but truth doesn't forget. He didn't react. He didn't need to. He thought it was over. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered. Some against her, some not even sure what they were chanting for. News vans, flash bulbs, another scandal to dissect. Celine kept her head high. Her parents weren't there. They had stopped calling after the second indictment. Her friends disappeared like the evidence. She stepped into the transport van. It smelled of rust and lost futures. The door slammed shut. Darkness. She sat there cuffed, staring at the wall. She knew they'd put her away quietly. A secure facility, away from noise, away from reporters. She would disappear. But she also knew something else, something they hadn't counted on. Truth is like fire. Even buried, it spreads. Even silenced, it remembers. Even forgotten, it waits. And Celine Cross would wait too. Because the sentence they gave her was just the start of another story, one that hadn't ended. Chapter 3. The system forgets. Celine Cross became a ghost the day the transport van doors closed. No trial updates, no press coverage, no trace. Her name vanished from the headlines by the end of the week, replaced by newer scandals, fresher outrage. Politicians shook hands. News anchors moved on, and David Hargrove's calendar returned to gala invites and legal briefings. Celine's world shrank to concrete walls and sterile air. They didn't send her to a federal penitentiary. That would have been too visible, too public. Instead, she was placed in a black site correctional facility. Off books, off grid, off everything. Officially, she didn't exist anymore. A digital ghost in a forgotten file. The guards didn't speak much. They weren't cruel, just efficient. The kind of efficiency that treated inmates like case numbers, not people. Celine watched everything. The cameras, the shift rotations, the way the lights flickered every third night around midnight. She memorized footsteps. She counted seconds between door buzzes. She traced silence the way others traced escape routes. But she wasn't looking to run. Not yet. She had time and fire. Most days, she didn't talk. There was no one to talk to. They kept her in a solo unit. No books, no pen, no phone calls. Just a wall, a bed, a toilet, and a camera blinking in the corner. Still, her mind moved. She remembered every word David said in court, every lie, every calculated breath. He hadn't just turned the system against her, he had taught it how. Sometimes at night, Celine would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering her name into the dark. Not so she wouldn't forget it, but so the walls would remember it when everything else was gone. Celine Cross. I was loyal. I was honest. And they buried me. Months passed. Seasons changed without her seeing them. The world rotated around sunlight she couldn't feel. But somewhere she knew David was thriving. She imagined him at rooftop parties, champagne in hand, his smile polished and warm. She pictured him slipping easily into interviews, telling stories about national security and justice, shaking hands with men who'd never been in a courtroom but thought they understood power. And she knew something else. David didn't just want her gone. He wanted her erased. That was the real sentence. Not years in confinement, but the silence, the forgetting. But Celine refused. Every day she repeated the facts to herself. The time stamp on the erased footage. The name of the private contractor who forged the intel. The serial number on the backup drive that disappeared. She repeated it over and over like a prayer. No, like a weapon. And one day, something changed. She found a note tucked beneath her dinner tray. No envelope, no signature, just a strip of paper folded twice. They missed something. We see you. Celine didn't smile. She didn't cry. But for the first time in over a year, she closed her eyes and slept without staring at the ceiling. The system may have forgotten her. The public may have moved on. But someone hadn't. And if someone still remembered, then the fire was still alive. Chapter 4. A Comfortable Life. David Hargrove was running late, but not for court. He adjusted his cufflinks in the rearview mirror of his Maserati, the city skyline glittering behind him like a trophy case. The valet was already waiting outside the glass doors of the Tower Lounge, one of those exclusive rooftop clubs where you had to know someone to get in and be someone to stay. He walked in, smiled, and the room opened around him. Women turned. Colleagues waved. Old clients patted him on the back. "David," they said, like they hadn't seen him in years, though most had shared drinks with him the week before. He took it all in stride, polished, charismatic, unshakable. That's who David Hargrove was now, the man who made headlines for saving the integrity of the Department of Security Oversight, the man who exposed a breach, who protected state secrets, who stood for law and order. No one asked what really happened to Celine Cross. Not anymore. If they did, they asked with a smirk, like it was old gossip already settled. David leaned against the bar and ordered a glass of scotch. Neat. 12 years old, like the system that had always aged in his favor. "Still the hero of the year," someone said behind him. He turned. Jared Langston, old college buddy, now some kind of defense consultant. Jared raised his glass and gave a half salute. David chuckled. "I'd settle for hero of the quarter." They laughed, talked contracts, debriefed wars over whiskey. That was David's life now. Rooftops, power lunches, occasional interviews with carefully worded answers, no more courtrooms, no more cross-examinations, and definitely no more women like Celine Cross. He'd buried that chapter neatly, erased the evidence, redirected the narrative. It wasn't hard when you understood how the system worked. You just had to know which files to delete, which people to bribe, and which truths were too dangerous to let live. He'd done it perfectly. No one doubted him. Well, almost no one. Later that night, back in his high-rise apartment, David loosened his tie and kicked off his shoes. The view from his floor-to-ceiling windows was stunning. City lights, moving traffic, everything below him. He turned on the TV, caught the end of a news segment. Nothing important. He poured another drink, walked to the mirror, looked himself in the eye. There was a flash, a flicker of memory he didn't like. Celine's eyes, the way she had stared at him during sentencing, not broken, not defeated, just still, like she was waiting for something. He poured the scotch a little faster. Her voice echoed for a second, soft but sharp. You won today, but truth doesn't forget. He shook it off. Dead case. Dead story. She was gone. The system had worked, and the comfortable life he'd built, untouchable. Still, as he sat down in the dark, drink in hand, a strange tension settled into his shoulders. For the first time in months, the silence in the room didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Chapter 5. Inside the walls. There were no clocks inside the facility, just routines. Celine Cross woke to the same sound every day, a soft buzz, followed by the mechanical groan of her door sliding open. A tray of food was placed on the small steel table in the corner. No forks, no knives, just a spoon and silence. She ate without tasting. Every movement was slow, calculated. Not because she was tired, but because she refused to let them see her break. Her body was under their control. Her time, her space, but not her mind. Never that. The walls around her were thick, gray concrete with no texture, no flaws. The kind of design meant to erase thought, to make everything feel the same. The camera in the corner blinked red like a heartbeat she didn't own. She never looked at it, but she always knew when it moved. At night, she trained her ears to follow the rhythms of the facility, the buzz of doors on other blocks, the distant click of security boots on steel, the muted hiss of whispers too low to catch. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Celine wasn't waiting for a rescue. She was watching for a mistake. She moved through her day like a shadow, unnoticed. The other inmates, what few there were, stayed on their side of the silence. She was in a wing by herself, solitary without the paperwork, invisible without the chains, until one night. The tray arrived like always, but this time, tucked beneath the edge of the plate was a thin plastic wrapper. Inside, a folded slip of paper, torn and smudged but legible. They think you're buried, but I see you. There was no name, no symbol. Just that one sentence, a lifeline wrapped in secrecy. Celine didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She just sat with it, stared at it for hours. Someone knew she was alive, and not just alive, but watching. It changed everything. She started writing in her mind, names, dates, serial codes. The last project she worked on before the arrest. The server ID she had memorized. The one that held the original footage before it was scrubbed. She traced the faces of everyone who had looked away, one by one, frame by frame. Each day after that, she moved differently, not faster, not louder, just sharper. She cleaned her space perfectly, not for neatness, but for control. Every square inch of the wall became familiar. Every screw in the vent, every groove in the floor tile, every blind spot in the camera's arc. She cataloged the guards, how they walked, where they paused, which ones looked twice at her cell and which ones never did. Weeks passed, or maybe months. It didn't matter. Celine became her own calendar. She marked time by memory. Day 1, betrayal. Day 28, silence. Day 62, first crack in the wall. Day 100 and something, the note. Her strength was not in her arms, it was in her patience, because when everything was stripped from her, identity, voice, name, Only one thing remained: intention. And hers hadn't changed. She didn't want revenge, she wanted justice. The real kind. The kind the courtroom refused to give. So she prepared. Every breath she took behind those walls was a promise that she wouldn't stay in them forever. And when she stepped out, the world that buried her would remember why she was dangerous. Chapter 6. Unsealed Truth. It started with a flicker on the surveillance screen, just a half-second static pulse, barely noticeable. But Celine noticed. The red camera light in the corner of her cell blinked, paused, then resumed its rhythm. She stared at it for several minutes. Nothing changed, no alarm, no guard rushing to check. The next morning, the routine continued like always. The food tray arrived, the same tasteless oatmeal, the same sealed water bottle, but this time, the bottle had a scratch along the bottom rim. Too deliberate to be random. Celine turned it carefully, heart steady, mind racing. Etched into the plastic, hidden beneath the edge of the label, were 5 digits. 09341. She memorized them instantly. No instructions, no signature, no context. But Celine knew that number. It was the project ID of a secure operations folder she had uncovered just days before her arrest, back when she still worked for the Department of Security Oversight. It was the folder that contained surveillance footage of illegal drone strikes, falsified logs, and worst of all, financial transactions linking David Hargrove to private contractors profiting off fabricated raids. That folder was the reason she was here. She had flagged it. She had reported it. She had backed it up on a hidden drive. And someone who had access now, had found it again. The next 3 weeks blurred into preparation. Celine didn't sleep much. She began exercising more. Push-ups, pacing, stretches. Nothing aggressive enough to raise alarms, but enough to condition herself again. She cleaned obsessively, not out of boredom, but to check for other messages. She studied the guards' faces. One new face rotated in twice a week. A young man, late 20s, brown eyes, soft jawline. He walked slower than the others, hesitated longer near her cell. His badge never beeped when he passed by. She didn't trust him, but she recognized him. He looked too much like Agent Marcus Dyer, an analyst she'd worked with years ago in Intel Review. The one person in the entire agency who had once told her, quietly, "You're not wrong, but you're not safe either." Now he was here. She never addressed him, never made eye contact. But one morning, she found her spoon bent slightly, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. On the back curve of the handle, engraved so faintly it could have been a scratch, was a phrase, "Back door still exists. It's waiting." Her breath hitched. She remembered the backdoor protocol, a fail-safe code embedded deep in the agency's network. Only 2 people had known it even existed, herself and the engineer who designed it. The engineer who had mysteriously resigned and vanished 3 months before her arrest. The implication was clear. Someone had found the path back in, and they were giving her a chance. Celine spent the next 5 days meditating, slowing her body, conserving her energy. The next move wasn't escape. It was resurrection. The world thought she was gone. But the truth was surfacing again, not because justice worked, but because someone had cracked open the lock from inside, and she could almost feel it, that shift in the air, like a wire being pulled taut, like a storm forming behind the glass. The walls hadn't cracked yet, but they were vibrating. Celine Cross sat on her bunk, upright, alert. Her eyes were open, her fists clenched. And somewhere, on a server in a building filled with locked rooms and untouchable men, her name had just reappeared on a classified access log. Chapter 7. The Ghost Leaves the Cell. They didn't sound an alarm when they opened her door. No sirens, no cuffs, no warnings, just the hiss of hydraulic locks and the cold voice of a guard she'd never seen before. "Cross, move," Celine blinked, slowly. The tray on her table was untouched, the room sterile as ever, but something felt different. The hallway light bled into her cell like sunrise after years of blackout. She rose, calm and measured. Her body knew not to flinch. 2 guards flanked her, but they didn't grab her, they didn't chain her. They simply walked, one ahead, one behind, as if escorting a woman who didn't exist. The cameras didn't follow. Doors buzzed open with unusual speed. Something was happening, something that wasn't protocol. They reached a narrow service corridor, no cameras, no windows. A door at the end stood open. Beyond it, a van, no markings, no license plates. Its engine idled quietly like it had been waiting longer than she had. The driver never looked back, just opened the door. "Where are we going?" Celine asked. No answer. She stepped inside. No words were spoken as they drove, no radio, no paperwork. She sat in silence, wrapped in a jacket 2 sizes too big. Her clothes were new, plain, dark, untraceable. Her file, her sentence, her entire digital record had likely just been deleted. But not for her sake. This wasn't freedom, it was a transfer. She didn't know to whom or for what purpose, but she recognized the shape of a covert deal. She could smell it in the quiet. Someone had pulled strings, someone powerful, someone nervous. After hours of silence and turns she couldn't track, the van stopped. A man opened the door, not a guard, not military, not in uniform. He looked like a librarian, with wire-frame glasses and a clipboard. He nodded once. "Ms. Cross," he said, "you're going to be asked for nothing and told very little. But know this, your silence bought you time. Someone upstairs thinks you're more useful alive." She stared at him. Useful for what? For now, vanishing. He led her down a corridor into a dim safe house, barely furnished but clean. On the desk was a sealed envelope, a change of clothes, and a flash drive. "You'll find everything you need in there." Then he left. Celine didn't move for a long time. When she finally opened the envelope, she found only 2 things: an ID card with a name she'd never used, and a photo of David Hargrove, smiling at a podium, accepting an award titled National Security Leadership Excellence. The date on the photo was just 3 days ago. He was still thriving, still lying, and he had no idea that Celine Cross was no longer in a cell, no longer silent, no longer forgotten. She inserted the flash drive into the safehouse laptop. The screen flickered. A folder popped up. Inside, surveillance files, metadata, emails, everything they'd taken from her years ago, the evidence, the trails, the truth. Her heartbeat didn't rise. She didn't cry. She just leaned back in the chair and stared at the man on the screen, his polished face, his practiced charm, his comfort. "You thought burying me would end the story," she murmured. "But ghosts don't stay dead." And Celine Cross. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a ghost walking free. Chapter 8. No court, no cameras. David Hargrove liked control. He liked polished mornings, silk ties, and tight schedules. He liked knowing where everyone stood, who owed him favors, and which doors would open with a single call. He had spent a decade mastering systems, people, silence. And silence had served him well. Until now. The first message came in a white envelope. No return address, no postmark. It was waiting for him on his desk in his private office. His secretary swore she hadn't seen anyone come in. Inside the envelope, a printed photo, a drone still frame. One David had seen before, years ago, before he ordered it deleted. An image of a small village, a wall reduced to rubble, and 3 unidentified bodies in the wreckage, stamped in red, classified below it, one line scrawled in pen, "Truth watches longer than the system remembers." David didn't sleep that night. He told himself it was a prank, some disgruntled junior agent, A cruel joke, until the second drop arrived. This time, it came through a burner phone left inside his briefcase. The message was short, a 6-digit code. He stared at it for hours before realizing it was the access key to a secure archive, one only he and 2 now-dead officials had ever known existed. He accessed it on a secure laptop, his hands trembling for the first time in years. What he found hit like a punch to the chest. Everything. Emails, transfers, memos, video logs, all tied to Operation Stonepath, the Black Ops program he buried along with Celine Cross. He slammed the laptop shut, sweated through his suit, burned the phone, called no one. Whoever had this had enough to ruin him, to bury him the way he buried her. And worst of all, it meant one of 2 things. Either the agency had betrayed him, or Celine Cross wasn't dead in that cell after all. He checked her records. Access denied. Even with his credentials, even with his clearance. Her name wasn't in the system. Not marked dead, not marked alive, just gone. He poured himself a drink, sat in the dark, watched the city from his penthouse window. He told himself there was no reason to panic. But that same night, his Maserati refused to start. Mechanics found no damage, no evidence of tampering. But the ignition had been fried, deliberately. When he returned home, the security camera in his garage was turned 30 degrees, enough to miss the front bumper of his car, enough to watch him without recording who did it. The next day, his private inbox was flooded with ghost emails, blank messages with timestamps exactly 5 years apart, each dated to the day he testified in Celine's trial. 9:41 a.m., 10:32 a.m., 11:06 a.m., exactly matching the times she had tried to speak. Object. Plead. He slammed his laptop shut again. He called his lawyer, told him to update security protocols, said nothing about the rest, because there was no one he could trust. Not now. Not when the walls he built were beginning to whisper. David sat in the middle of a fortress made of power, but it was cracking. No court had summoned him, no press had questioned him, no agency had charged him. But the silence he loved was turning into something else, a warning, and somewhere out there. Celine Cross was watching. Chapter 9. The fire begins. The sun hung low over the desert, bleeding orange into the sand. Miles from the city, far beyond any signal tower or surveillance drone, a black Maserati sat parked on the shoulder of a cracked highway, alone, gleaming, waiting. David Hargrove paced a few feet away, sweat clinging to his temples. He checked his phone again. No signal. Not even one bar. He cursed under his breath and looked toward the horizon. The location had come in anonymously. Drive west. Mile marker 213. Come alone. No cameras, no backup, or everything goes public. Attached was a photo of him on the witness stand, next to the header of a confidential drone strike report. The threat was real. David had considered ignoring it. He'd even started drafting a legal suppression order, until he found another photo slipped beneath his car windshield the next morning. Celine. Standing in shadow, eyes forward, alive. Now, standing in the desert, he felt the wind shifting. He wasn't in a courtroom anymore. He was prey. The Maserati beeped, its alarm chirping once, then again, then fell silent. David turned. The ground beneath the car shimmered with heat, then glowed. Boom! The explosion was sudden, deafening. The car ignited in a bloom of fire and black smoke. Flames twisted skyward, licking the sky like accusations. David flew backward, landing hard against the gravel. His ears rang, his hands scraped open, his suit, once pristine, now hung in tatters. Dust and blood painted his cuffs. He rolled, coughing, blinking. The fire roared behind him. And then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, the kind that didn't need to rush. He turned, shielding his eyes from the sun. Through the smoke she appeared, Celine Cross, alive, not just alive, unshaken. Her walk was quiet, her face unreadable. She wore black from head to toe, tactical and minimal. No insignia, no flash, no mercy. David tried to stand. His knee buckled. He crawled back on his hands, leaving smears of red on the sand. "You!" he croaked. Celine didn't answer. She stopped 5 feet away. The pistol in her hand gleamed dully under the fading sun. David raised one hand in surrender. "Celine, wait. Let's talk. We can fix this." She tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning his broken form. "You think this is about fixing?" Her voice was low, leveled, almost kind. "You think I came all this way for negotiation?" David choked on the dust, struggling to sit up. "They told me you were locked up, gone." "They lied," she said. "Just like you." He shook his head desperately. "It wasn't personal. I had orders. I was trying to protect yourself." Silence. Behind them, the Maserati burned, now a skeleton of steel and flame. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sand. Celine took a step forward. The gun didn't shake. "You testified," she said. "I was sentenced." David's lip trembled. "You don't have to do this." "I didn't have to survive either," she said. "But I did." He reached into his pocket slowly. "Please, just let me show you." Her voice cut him. "Move again, and I end this now." He froze. She raised the pistol, not shaking, not blinking. "No judge, no gavel," she whispered. "Just me." David stared up at her, eyes wide. "You ended my life with one sentence," she said. "Today, I return the favor with something even shorter." Chapter 10. Desert Reckoning. Time slowed. The desert wind curled around them, catching on the scorched wreckage of David's Maserati. Embers drifted through the air like falling stars, silent, glowing, damning. Celine Cross stood firm, the pistol steady in her grip, eyes never leaving the man who had once erased her with a lie. David Hargrove was on his knees now, arms raised, his once expensive suit torn and bloodied. His face, always so composed in courtrooms, so confident at podiums, was streaked with dust, sweat, and panic. "Celine," he said again, softer this time, "you're not like this." She didn't answer. Because she wasn't like this. He made her become this. "You don't have to be a killer," he added, his voice trembling at the edges. "You can still walk away." Celine took one step forward. "Walked away," she said flatly, "the day they put me in that cage." David swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." She blinked once. "No, you're afraid." His lip twitched. Behind them, the last of the fire in the Maserati hissed out. Metal groaning, plastic melting. It smelled like burnt money and dead secrets. "Tell me," Celine said, voice low. "Do you remember the names?" David furrowed his brow. "What names?" "The ones in the files," she said. "The ones you silenced. The lives you buried when you scrubbed the footage." "I didn't. Don't lie to me." The gun didn't move. "I remember them. Every single one." She took another step. "Alim Fakouri, 9 years old, playing outside when the drone hit." David looked down. "Mara Kouri, 17, shot trying to carry her sister to safety." He winced. "Dr. Jabril Mehta, field medic. You labeled him an insurgent to justify the strike." He whispered, "Stop." "No." Her voice sharpened. "You made me the criminal for speaking their names, for trying to bring light into a room built for shadows." David looked up, eyes red. "I was protecting operations. National security." "You were protecting yourself," she said coldly. He didn't deny it. The wind shifted again, blowing sand across the road. No cars, no cameras, no escape. This wasn't a courtroom. There were no lawyers, no bailiffs, no judge, just the accused and the forgotten. Celine stared at him. In her eyes there was no rage, no vengeance, only weight. The weight of years stolen, of justice deferred, of names left unspoken. "You took everything from me," she said. "You signed a piece of paper and sentenced me to disappear." David began to cry, not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, helpless sobbing of a man who finally realized the system he controlled couldn't save him out here. Celine lowered the pistol a few inches, but didn't holster it. "I didn't come here to kill you," she said. "I came here to make you feel what I felt, to know what it means to be forgotten." He looked up at her, trembling. Then, "Let me go." She tilted her head. "No," she aimed again. "But I'll let you live with it." He froze. Celine stepped back, slowly, without turning away. The desert swallowed her in the haze of smoke and dying sun. David collapsed fully, gasping, alive but shattered, because death would have been simple, but now he had to carry her truth. He had to explain the scars. He had to wonder every day if the next shadow was her coming back to finish what he started. And that, Celine knew, was the kind of sentence no judge could deliver. But she could. Chapter 11. No one to defend you. David Hargrove didn't drive back. He walked. The desert wind pressed against his torn suit, the heat slicing into his skin like dry razors. Every step was agony, sand in his shoes, blood on his palms, lungs burning from smoke and shame. He didn't know how long it took. Hours, maybe a day. There was no sense of time out here, just the pounding echo of Celine's words and the weight of what he'd become. No driver came for him, no security detail, no rescue, because no one knew. And that was what terrified him most. She'd left him alive but removed his shield. No legal buffer, no PR narrative, no prepared statement, only truth, raw and unfiltered. When he finally reached the edge of civilization, the first thing he did was vomit in the dust beside a gas station. People stared. A man in a ruined designer suit, limping and bloodied, walking out of nowhere, but no one asked if he was okay. They just pulled out their phones. By nightfall, his face was all over social media. "Isn't this David Hargrove? What happened to his car? Looks like he saw a ghost." He made one call to his personal attorney. No answer. Then to his secretary, then his firm. All voicemail. He was locked out of his internal server by the next morning. By noon, an anonymous leak hit the press. Files, footage, names, deaths, dates, his signature. All of it. Everything Celine had gathered. Everything he'd buried. Now on every major outlet and whistleblower channel. The public snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. Hashtags exploded. Reporters camped outside his condo. Protesters screamed outside his firm. He didn't go in. He didn't dare. Instead, he sat alone in a cheap hotel room, shades drawn, staring at the screen. There she was, a still frame of Celine emerging from the smoke, calm, composed, and very much alive. The caption below read, "Silence no more, the return of Celine Cross." David tossed the phone across the room. He slammed his fist on the desk, breathing hard. Not out of anger, but out of panic. She hadn't just ruined him. She had reversed the narrative, rewritten history in real time. And the terrifying part? He had no defense. There were no lawyers to spin it. No judge to cut her off, no security clearance to shield him. She'd weaponized the truth, and it was louder than anything he'd ever said under oath. He remembered the courtroom, the gavel, the jury, the absolute silence when he spoke. They believed him because he looked like the system they trusted. But Celine had learned something in that cell, something he never understood. When you take everything from someone, the only thing left is purpose. And she had returned with nothing but that. David looked in the mirror. What stared back was not a man of power, not a patriot, not even a lawyer, just a coward in exile. He washed his hands again, scrubbed at the blood that wasn't there anymore but still felt fresh. Then he sat down and tried to draft a statement. But every word sounded hollow, every excuse already preempted. The world had already heard her truth, and it echoed louder than anything his money could buy. He was alone, not in prison, not in exile, but in a cage she left unlocked, a cage called consequence. Chapter 12. Final words. The world didn't end with a gunshot. It ended with a whisper, played on loop across every platform, every screen, every feed. Selene Cross didn't go live. She didn't schedule a press conference. She didn't stand in front of flags or podiums. Instead, her voice arrived quietly, like a ghost through the wires. A short video, 34 seconds, black background. No face, only her voice, sharp, clear, cold. You testified. I was sentenced. That was it. No one questioned it. No one defended me. You buried the truth with paperwork. I dug it back out with silence. You destroyed my name with a lie. I reclaimed it with evidence. This is not vengeance. This is the verdict that never came. That was all. No signature, no slogan, just finality. It spread like wildfire. The media called it a digital reckoning. Protesters held up signs with her words. Former whistleblowers emerged from the cracks, emboldened. Internal investigations reopened. David Hargrove's firm released a statement. Effective immediately, Mr. Hargrove has resigned. But David didn't leave on his own. Security footage leaked from the firm's underground parking garage. David, disheveled, shouting at two senior partners. He tried to push past them. One of them held up a flash drive. Then the elevator doors closed. The footage cut. He was never seen there again. Meanwhile, Selene Cross remained invisible. No one could trace the original source of the leak. No one could pinpoint the IP address. No one could even confirm if she was in the country. That only made her more powerful. She became a symbol, not of vengeance, but of what happens when the system silences the wrong woman. Students painted murals of her silhouette emerging from smoke. Veterans posted stories under hashtags like #, her name was Selene. Former DSO agents began to speak out, slowly, cautiously, confirming bits and pieces of what she exposed. But Selene didn't speak again. She had said all she needed to. David, on the other hand, couldn't escape. He tried to hide behind walls, lawyers, and distractions. But his name had become radioactive. His allies evaporated. His money dried up. He was reduced to renting short-term apartments under different aliases, avoiding cameras, clutching burner phones like prayer beads, and at night, when he closed his eyes, he heard her voice. Not the one from the video, the one from the desert. You ended my life with one sentence. Today, I return the favor, with something even shorter. He'd relive it, the way she stared, the silence between her finger and the trigger, the moment she chose not to kill him. And in that moment, he realized she hadn't spared him. She'd sentenced him, no one to believe his story, no courtroom to cry foul, just a world watching as the lie unraveled, and at its center, not a soldier, not a victim, but a woman who refused to vanish. Selene Cross had become the judge, the witness, and the reckoning, all in one. Chapter 13. The Bullet. In the quiet edge of the desert, where even the wind refused to stay long, the memory lived. No police had ever shown up at the scene, no investigation, no bullet casings recovered. The scorched skeleton of the Maserati had been hauled away days later, labeled accidental engine failure in the official report. The road itself bore no name. The sand had already begun to reclaim the tire tracks, as if the confrontation had never happened. But Selene Cross remembered. Every detail, the sun behind her, the heat rising off the blacktop, the trembling in David's knees, and the weight of the gun in her hand. A gun she never fired, and yet it echoed louder than any she'd ever held in combat. She didn't need to pull the trigger. The bullet was already fired. It wasn't made of metal. It didn't need gunpowder. It was forged from silence, sharpened by time. and carried by the truth. The day Celine chose not to kill David Hargrove, she delivered a wound that no doctor could treat, a sentence that no court could reverse. She stripped him of the one armor he'd always trusted, power. And power, once cracked, collapses like glass. In the days that followed, Celine moved carefully, always moving. No calls, no patterns. The safe house changed weekly. Her face never showed in cameras. She let the fire she started speak louder than her presence ever could. But she wasn't hiding. She was watching. When David's resignation hit the news, she was sitting in a rented room in Tijuana. When the agency launched its internal audit, she was walking the crowded streets of Dakar. When a former agent publicly confirmed that evidence had been suppressed during Celine's trial, she smiled quietly from a train window in Prague. She didn't gloat, because this wasn't revenge. This was release. For the people who died in silence, for the files that were erased, for the truth she carried alone for too long. But justice, she knew, was not a single shot. It was a slow burn, scorching everything that had hidden in shadow for years. One night, weeks later, she found herself standing at a payphone in a forgotten part of Nevada. No one used payphones anymore. That's why it was perfect. She dropped in 3 quarters, dialed a number no one else remembered. It rang once, then again. A voice answered. Cautious, male, familiar. Celine? She didn't say yes. He didn't ask how she got out. They both knew the system didn't break people like her. It buried them. And when you come back from being buried, you don't waste time with pleasantries. I need you to keep the light on, she said. There was a pause. Then, you coming home? She looked out over the empty horizon. I'm not sure home exists anymore, she replied. But I've got one more thing to do. He didn't ask what. He only said, then I'll keep it on. The line went dead. She stood for a moment, her hand still on the receiver, feeling the weight of everything she had not said, everything she had lost, everything she had left. Then she walked, back into the silence, back into the world that thought it had swallowed her. But now, every time a screen flickered to life, every time a server opened an old file, every time someone whispered her name, it echoed. Because justice had a sound, and it wasn't the gavel, it wasn't the courtroom. It was the bullet she never fired. But everyone still heard. Chapter 14. Aftermath. The world moved on, but differently. Celine Cross no longer had to speak. She had become an echo, a name etched into encrypted documents, painted across murals, and whispered in boardrooms too late at night. She didn't trend on social media anymore. The viral videos faded. The protest signs were replaced. But what remained, what truly stuck, was fear. Not of Celine herself, but of the silence she shattered. In Washington, closed-door hearings multiplied. Internal watchdogs grew teeth. Several officials connected to Operation Stonepath quietly retired. Others, not fast enough, were subpoenaed. None admitted to knowing the extent of the cover-up. They didn't have to. The files Celine released spoke for them. One by one, news outlets dug deeper. The pattern emerged. Strikes authorized without intel. Civilian deaths reclassified as hostile casualties. Private contractors funneling payouts through offshore accounts, many of which traced back to names that had once graced awards galas and security summits. David Hargrove had disappeared. Some said he fled the country. Others claimed he was hiding in plain sight. A few believed Celine had returned to finish the job after all. But Celine knew the truth. He was still alive, still looking over his shoulder, still waiting for the sound of boots in the hallway or a knock at the door that never came. And that was her justice. Somewhere in Munich, a woman ordered coffee under a false name. In Cape Town, she paid cash for a small apartment. In Seoul, she walked through a crowded plaza, blending with the current of people. always moving, always observing. But she wasn't running. She had nothing to run from. No court record, no charges, no past, at least not one anyone could use. Her fingerprints had been erased, her identity encrypted. The people who helped her, the ones who had sent the notes, cracked the logs, and reopened the files, they were still out there. A network born not from loyalty, but belief. Belief in correction, belief in truth. She never met most of them, never needed to. Her mission had never been about exposure. It had been about balance, about tipping the scale that had been forced to weigh lies heavier than justice. Now the scale stood still. On a quiet morning in Lisbon, she sat alone at a cafe, sun warming her face, a worn leather notebook on the table beside her espresso. She didn't write, not yet. She only stared at the page, empty and waiting. The owner brought her the bill, smiled kindly. "Where are you from?" he asked in broken English. Celine paused. That question used to sting. Now it only made her think. "I'm from a place that doesn't exist anymore," she said. He laughed, assuming it was a joke. "Aren't we all?" She smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess we are." She left a generous tip, walked to the edge of the plaza. Her steps were lighter now, her eyes softer. The rage had cooled into something quieter, something sharper. Conviction. Back in the U.S., a judge who had presided over her trial quietly submitted his resignation. A whistleblower podcast released a series titled Crossed Lines. It opened with the line, "What happens when justice forgets?" Someone has to remember. Celine never gave interviews. She never claimed her seat back at the table, because that table was broken, and she had no interest in joining the same system that once erased her. Instead, she built something else, not with force, but with presence. A quiet resistance. A name that didn't fade. A verdict no courtroom ever reached. Chapter 15. The Last Line. Rain tapped against the train window like fingers drumming a warning. Celine Cross sat alone in the rear car, her reflection blurred in the glass. The city outside was foreign. Gray buildings, wet cobblestone, a language she didn't speak flowing from the speakers overhead. And yet, she felt no fear, no urgency, only stillness. It had been a year since the fire in the desert, a year since she'd stood over David Hargrove's crumpled body, pistol drawn, and chosen silence over execution. A year since she'd handed the world the truth in the form of files, recordings, and evidence meticulously hidden behind digital walls, and then walked away before the crowd arrived. A year of movement. Not hiding, not escaping, just drifting. Until now. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the old envelope. The edges were worn, the seal broken long ago, but inside was the same photo. David at the podium, receiving his award before the world knew what lay beneath his smile. She stared at it, not with hatred, not anymore, with finality. The last line of her story wasn't him. It was her. At the next stop, she stepped off the train and into the rain. The city was waking. She moved like a whisper, through alleys, across plazas, into doorways that blinked red lights once before letting her pass. She entered a building with no sign and descended a stairwell that smelled like dust and wire. At the bottom, a small room lit by a single desk lamp. A man sat there, young, nervous, a laptop open in front of him. He looked up when he saw her and stood so fast the chair scraped loudly. "You're real," he said. Celine raised an eyebrow. "I mean," he stammered, "I didn't think you'd actually come." She sat down, calm, still, the kind of presence that made silence feel like weight. "You said you had something," she said. He nodded, sliding the laptop toward her. On the screen, a live feed of a secure server, surveillance data, private communications, all connected to a new name, a rising official who had started using Stonepath's old contractors under a different alias. "They're starting it again," he said. "Different shell company, different front, but same strategy." Celine stared at the screen. The same game, the same weapons, different names. The system didn't stop. It just rebranded. "I don't know what to do," the man said. "I can't go public. They'll bury me." She looked up. "Then don't go public," she said. "Give it to me." His eyes widened. You're going after them?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Outside, the rain turned harder, the thunder of truth knocking again. Celine took a small drive from her jacket, plugged it in, and began copying the files. The screen blinked, transferred, saved. Then she stood. "You're not alone," she said. He looked at her, half in awe, half in fear. "They'll come for you." "They already did," she replied. She walked out before he could say more. Back into the night, into the rain, into the unending war not of bullets, but of truth and memory. And somewhere across the world, David Hargrove woke from another nightmare, gasping, drenched in sweat, his mind haunted not by a shot fired, but by one that never came. Because Celine Cross had never needed to end him. She had become something far more enduring. A shadow in the machine, a name that wouldn't stay buried, a voice they couldn't mute. Not justice as the world knew it, justice as it should have been all along. And in the quiet before morning, she whispered to herself, not a threat, not a vow, just the truth. "You ended mine with a sentence. I rewrote yours with the last line.